So Ed, welcome to Nodes and Ways. Thanks for coming.
Thanks very much, Austin. Good to be here again. Well, first time, but you and I had a brief chat last week, which was nice, cover a few things. Now back at it for real.
Back at it for the real thing this time. For anybody who hasn't come across Ed in the OpenStreetMap project, he is one of my favorite people. He is irrepressibly upbeat, and I have really enjoyed working with him on several projects over the years.
I'm very glad to hear it. It's been a pleasure. You've been one of our best contributors and got the 500 million image as well. So could not have thought of a better person.
So Ed, I'd love to get your perspective on coming into the OpenStreetMap project and not really knowing much about it prior, because I know you came in via your job and you weren't part of the community before that. So what was that like?
Yeah, so as you said, I joined Mapillary, and that was back in 2015. And prior to that, I had no real knowledge of the OpenStreetMap community. And funnily enough, like looking back on it, my only interaction that I'm aware of with OpenStreetMap prior to that was when I was a poor uni student in Melbourne trying to download free maps of Melbourne on my phone. And I think some of the only free maps back then were OpenStreetMap. So I was using it and I had no idea. But yeah, between that point and joining Mapillary, I really wasn't involved in any way. But I've always loved maps since I was a little kid. And so joining Mapillary was very much about getting to explore that passion further. And when I joined, though, I started to interact with the OpenStreetMap community and people contributing to Mapillary. And there was that question of like, why would someone take their time to add a restaurant or to add the speed limit on a highway? It just boggled my mind that people volunteered in their own free time to do that. And then since that, like I've been on a journey where like I've come to respect enormously the different people that contribute, the different motivations, and I've become one of those people as well, contributing often to OpenStreetMap, like almost on a daily basis now. It's definitely increased in the last year in particular. Yeah, understanding that people contribute for a variety of different reasons, whether it's they're interested in cycling or interested in mapping disaster resilience, or just even making it easier for them to get to A to B and putting in things like speed limits or surface type on the road. So it's been really interesting getting to explore that, but it would be interesting if I didn't have that passion for maps to see how I'd see the community and whether that would be any different. But yeah, definitely a fascinating community to work with. And I almost wish I could have been working in OpenStreetMap longer. It would have been really cool to see the early days back in once after it started and see that growth as well.
Yeah, I know that I always hear about the exponential growth curve that OpenStreetMap had in the very beginning. You can look at old Steve Coast talks and he'll show the chart of very few contributors and it spikes straight up. In the early days, there was just huge growth. And there's still growth today, but not on that same exponential scale as there was before.
Yeah, and it's interesting the people that would have been contributed back then, because they would have had to have a lot of faith that this project was actually going to take off. You know, I don't know how comfortable I would have felt back in 2006, let's say, adding all this data to the map, taking GPS tracks of my walks and spending countless hours putting this together, not being completely sure of where it's going to go. So it was definitely quite courageous, but I'm glad that they did it, because it formed the foundation of the map that we have today.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So speaking of OSM contributors, you work for Mapillary. We all use Mapillary. At least I use it extensively in my mapping. So do you have any stats, or can you tell us how much the OSM contributors are using Mapillary as a tool to improve the map?
Yeah, sure. So on our side, we always have tried to get it as close to a concrete sense of what percentage of our contributors are coming from OpenStreetMap. And it's hard to get an exact figure because, you know, we don't have exact data. Not everyone's logging in with their OpenStreetMap account. But we've made some estimations based on things like people who are using their OpenStreetMap account and just like the way people are editing, the way people are contributing to Mapillary. And we estimate that about probably 60 to 70% of community, I'd say 70% of community contributors are coming from OpenStreetMap or using the data in OpenStreetMap in some way. So that shows us real significance of OpenStreetMap. And I think if you look at the top 20, in particular the top 50, the people who are contributing the vast bulk of the imagery, they're even more likely to be coming from OpenStreetMap. And So as part of like trying to get better at tracking this, we've started to look at things like how we can encourage the use of source equals Mapillary more, or even just having, like, I don't know if you've seen lately an ID editor, but it actually knows when you've toggled the street level imagery layer and will put Mapillary as a source. And so that's been great for us, making it a lot easier for us to track. And we've seen, I think, like 128,000 nodes recently that had Mapillary listed as a source. So it's good to get that level of granularity. And we're able to see that I think it's still true that highway related features, so roads, ways, that's still the predominant use of Mapillary. Right. But of course, there's many other things that are being used with Mapillary as well. Things like pedestrian accessibility is becoming more popular. Building features was one that was asked of me recently, that there's a group in Ireland that's collecting imagery for that purpose. So we're seeing other use cases, but I think we really need to tie in the tracking better in terms of like making sure Mapillary is listed as a source, maybe even knowing which image in particular was used, just so that we have a better awareness of exactly how it's being used, and that makes us better able to improve upon ID and JOSM editors.
Yeah, wasn't it Chris who gave the source equals Mapillary talk at State of the Map US last year?
Yeah, I think that would have been Chris. So the 2019.
I know it's hard to know that it's 2020 because we're just inside and dates mean nothing anymore.
That's exactly how I feel, yeah.
Oh, boy. So can you tell me, Ed, I know you guys have a lot of capture projects that you sponsor and that you encourage. Do you have any kind of special standout capture projects that people have taken part in?
Sure, yeah. I won't refer to them as capture projects, though, because that's actually a term that we use ourselves for very managed projects with...
Oh, right. Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen the Mapillary for Drivers app, but that's where we have people creating an area of interest and then... Well, actually, I know you have because you've used it.
I'm sorry, that's probably where I got the name.
Yeah. So for those listening, Austin was one of the first people to test Mapillary for Drivers in... it was in Greenville, wasn't it, that you were testing it?
Yeah, here in Greenville, South Carolina.
And really showing that you can get comprehensive image coverage in an area using the Mapillary for Drivers app. And he was coordinating with Mike, was it? In
yeah, Mike, nice.
Well? Yeah. So beyond capture projects, just community projects in general that are really interesting for us. So one that I talk about often for good reason is Bike Ottawa. And I talk about that because that was where we utilized Complete the Map, which is a tool where we overlay a grid over a particular area, and that's color-coded according to how much imagery has been captured in that area. And it kind of motivates people to collect comprehensive imagery. Bike Ottawa was a group that came together, and they're doing some really impressive work on bike advocacy and working out where infrastructure is lacking, collecting imagery in some cases, and then mapping those roads and where potentially more investment is needed. And then lobbying to government with kind of really concrete reports on what infrastructure is lacking. And so with this particular project, I think they captured about 1.4 million images over the course of the month, the majority of which was captured on bicycle with action cams or with smartphones mounted to the bike. So that's a project I've been really impressed with and hope that we could replicate elsewhere. There's plenty of others, though, as well. I say Berlin was one of the first Complete the Map projects that we ran, and that was where the whole idea came about and where we proved that it could work. And we had people contributing on motorbikes and people walking. And it was the idea that people would go down roads that they wouldn't usually go down expressly for the purpose of collecting new street level imagery, in much the same way that someone might walk down a road in the outer suburbs of London because that's not on the map and capture that for the first time back in 2005 or 2006. So it's really exciting to see that there's a willingness there to get new data and new places. And yeah, I mean, we could talk for hours about the different projects that have done that. There's plenty of examples across the world, not just in Germany and Canada, but even places like the Philippines where there's a really active community. Indonesia's become more active recently and seeing a lot of exciting stuff going on there with, in particular, the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team and then other locations as well.
That's great. Yeah, I've definitely tried to cover as much as my hometown here as I can because it's such a valuable tool for mapping. I know I had a project where I was trying to add speed limits to every road in my town, and I was going through imagery trying to find it. And the AI actually pulled out speed limit signs where I didn't see them, like from one street, and then the speed limit sign was on another street around the corner, but it pulled it out, and I was able to grab the speed limit off of that sign, even though I hadn't driven that street yet. I was like, oh, wow, this is so cool. It helps me get all the speed limits so much faster.
And I think that's why when you asked me at the start what it's often used for, like what we see from the OpenStreetMap community, that's often at the top is the speed limits, the highway equals data, because it's just so useful, particularly when it's being extracted automatically.
Yeah, that's great. And I know before you had mentioned that it works super well for things like crosswalk data as well.
Yeah, that's correct. So crosswalks is one that fits under the map features category, which is points that we detect that we've actually made available in OpenStreetMap. So if anyone is in ID Editor looking at the right-hand toggle, looking under map data, they'll be able to see the Mapillary image layer, Mapillary traffic signs, which has been there for probably 4 years now, and then the map features edition, which is a newer edition that I think my colleague Chris talked about, probably in the US as well, but it was mentioned in Heidelberg at the conference last year. And the map features is from a subset of features that we identify automatically, but that we've also found useful for OpenStreetMap. So things like streetlights, fire hydrants, crosswalks, the kind of features that you'd want to add to the map. And we've made it such that you can request data in your area. So you'll see a little form that you can click on, add in your details, why it is that you want to use this data, and then we'll make it available for the geo. It's basically you create an area of interest and then we'll make it available for that area of interest. And I'm pretty excited to see how that's going to be used. There's already about 70 plus areas where that's being requested and is being used. And we're excited to see kind of what other ways people can use it. So beyond crosswalks, I think the other interesting ones in there are probably the street lights, which is particularly in use at the moment for people mapping like pedestrian safety and getting from A to B, and then the fire hydrants as well, which is something that's often ignored in OpenStreetMap. And then things like mailboxes might be one that are used going forward as well.
That's great. Recently, I was working with a local fire department, showing them how they can use OpenStreetMap to map out driveways in rural areas where houses are very, very far off the main road. And we're going through the whole OpenStreetMap thing and how we can edit driveways. And I showed them Mapillary because they had actually expressly mentioned paying a lot of money for software to manage their fire hydrants. So I showed them that I had pictures of several of their fire hydrants and fairly accurate coordinates to them from the imagery. And they were just blown away. And
Well, we'd love to see cameras mounted on fire trucks. I think we had an example in Poland where they were mounting. Yeah, we did actually. We had at least 2 fire trucks in Poland that had action cameras mounted on top of them, and they were mapping some of the fire trails. So I'd love to see that in the US as well, because those guys probably cover a lot of ground and in areas that wouldn't otherwise be captured typically.
Right, and especially in more rural areas too.
Yeah. There's a guy I know here in Melbourne, his name's Ewan, and he's been doing some great work for, I think, quite a few years where he's mapping out a lot of the rural areas, particularly for cases like the bushfires that we often have every season, and making sure that these remote tracks are on the map, that people know where they are to maintain them properly, and so that services can go there and respond appropriately. So he puts a lot of effort into mapping that using OpenStreetMap specifically, and he's a big Mapillary contributor as well.
That's great. That's one of the beautiful things about OpenStreetMap. It doesn't have to be commercially viable for us to go map that and make it useful to somebody.
No, but I think on top of that, like, many people are making it commercially viable. Like, they find these use cases that maybe other companies wouldn't be as interested in, but obviously it's interesting to them. Yeah. And there's people who've built, like, there's a lot of single consultancies, sole proprietors that are building great applications and very specific use cases, and they have domain expertise and they help fill in those gaps that maybe some other companies have ignored.
So speaking of, you mentioned ID earlier. How is the Mapillary and ID integrations going? I know we have ID v3 coming up soon.
Yeah, so the ID integration is going very well, I would say. I think the last year has been a big improvement. So few of my colleagues have been working hard on that. Chris, in particular, has kind of been doing a lot of the scoping out. I've got Till as well on our team has been scoping this out. Pepper's been gathering data analytics on what goes on behind the scenes in terms of people utilizing Mapillary. So all of this comes together to help us hopefully build even more useful versions of ID. And I think the stuff that's coming up that people would be excited about, or the stuff that we're actively working on, is more about how can we take these detections that we have and make them available in a more intuitive way for people and speed up the mapping workflow. Like not reduce the quality in any way, but make it easier for people to discern what has Mapillary detected that's not currently on the map, and get them to make a decision on whether that should be added. So, for example, the speed limits you mentioned before, as you said, there's often cases where you're driving down the street and it identifies a, say, 40 kilometre hour sign, or in your case, it might be a 40 mile per hour sign that's on the road perpendicular to where you were driving. And we want to be better able to show that to you. Maybe rather than showing three different instances where it's the same sign identified three times, we just want to show you that one point on the map, make sure we get more accurate at that, and then suggest that as an edit. And maybe if that speed limit is already correct and it's in the road, it's in associated with the way already, maybe we don't need to show that to you, and we hide that. It's maybe something you toggle in the background. So there's quite a bit of work looking at what that would look like from a UI point of view, what needs to go on behind the scenes for our computer vision, but really trying to leverage that computer vision capability we have to make editing more intuitive and make the experience just a bit more efficient for everyone. So I'd say that's the main stuff. The other stuff that comes up regularly, and I'm sure you probably are familiar with this, is the way ID editor in particular can slow down when you've got a lot of imagery in one area.
Yeah.
So I'm sure anywhere in Greenville would look like that, thanks to you. That wasn't really a problem we had to address in the early days. Any coverage was good coverage. Now, particularly on low bandwidth Australian internet, it can be incredibly frustrating trying to load 30 different Mapillary sequences. So we're trying to think about how to aggregate that data. And again, this poses some interesting design questions. Like, do you just show the most recent imagery? Well, what if that imagery is not very good? Then do you show the best imagery? Well, what defines the best imagery? And what if someone specifically wants to see something from 2018? How do we make it easy for that to be shown? And this is all the kind of stuff that we're looking at now. So one of the recent JOSM updates included time filtering, making it a bit easier to highlight the imagery that you're after. And I think that's kind of stuff is what we're looking at in ID Editor now.
It's great. Yeah, I have to confess, I'm not much of a JOSM user.
Me. I'm also not at the level yet where I feel super comfortable with JOSM. But when I see other people using it, I'm like amazed. I've seen some other individuals using it with all these plugins, and it seems like when you know what you're doing, it's incredibly powerful. When you have the shortcuts, it's incredibly powerful. But usually I'm just jumping to ID Editor. It just feels it's a lot easier for me to just get up and running. But I should probably put the time in to better learn JOSM.
It sounds like their Mapillary plugin. It's like it's A+.
Yeah, I can't say that myself on our own plugin. Like, I think it's great. It's a great tool, but there's definitely room for improvement there. I think the other thing with the JOSM plugin is that 360 imagery is hard to view in JOSM.
Right.
Part of that is because like the way we display imagery is using Mapillary for JavaScript, so the MJS, and that doesn't actually work in JOSM. So I don't know what exact viewer it's using, but it's using a different engine there to render 3D imagery, and that's quite slow relative to ID Editor. So that's another area of improvement for us.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Mapillary.js, because I've seen several projects based around Mapillary.js to display Mapillary imagery via other software for other projects. So I think it's awesome that you guys have opened that up, and I know that you also have a open SFM. So can you talk a little bit more about that and tell us what's available?
Yeah, so I would say those two are the big projects that a lot of people are utilizing and forking. So I think the great thing about MJS, as you said, is one that it provides this wonderful viewing experience where they get 3D reconstructions, they get this tool that allows them to navigate between images at different times at different places very easily. And the other aspect to that is it encourages them to upload to Mapillary as well. So there's a lot of sense in having an open source tool like that, getting people to integrate into whether it's a government website or a tourism website or someone building an application to show wheelchair accessibility in France. Whatever the tool is, like it's another reason for people to contribute to Mapillary, which is wonderful. So definitely one of our most popular open source projects. And then OpenCV is something that our computer vision developers contribute to a lot. And I would say those are the kind of the main things that people are working on at the moment. And then over time, there's probably a number of other open source repos that we have that I probably won't be able to go into in detail now, but some of the ones that aren't open that people ask us a lot are things like the Android apps and the iOS app. And we've kind of looked at it over the years about whether it could be opened up, but some of the issues there around a lot of the tools that we utilize in the apps that aren't open themselves. So we use a lot of like third-party libraries that make the app what it is, but aren't open themselves. And so that means that it becomes quite complex to separate out the different pieces of the app and make it all open. But yeah, it's good to just bring that up for a lot of the people asking why it hasn't been done yet. And kind of that's the reason right there.
Yeah, I would love to see it in F-Droid one day, but I'm glad that you guys have also always made the APK available for download, because I know I've had it on Google phones before, and I've been able to download Mapillary because the APK's there. And yeah, some things didn't work quite right, but it basically worked.
The APK is definitely useful. I've used that a lot when we're loading Mapillary onto a lot of like devices that we'd bought for humanitarian purposes, and some of the devices had very either strange versions of Android, or they were running like OSs that were based off Android. And that's where the APK is incredibly helpful, because you don't need to rely on the Google Play Store. You don't need to create an account with Google. You can kind of get around that.
Yeah, I imagine if you're in China or Russia or something like that, having that APK is probably more valuable because you wouldn't have access to Google Play, or you might not anyways.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of them in China are utilizing that.
Yeah, that's great. So you talked about all the bits of Mapillary that are open source. Is there anything, are there any toys we can't play with? Is there anything that is closed off to the community?
So I mentioned the Android apps, and that's for the reasons there. And I think the other big one is the computer vision side of things. So there is some IP that goes into identifying the signs that you get to utilize in OpenStreetMap and the map features. A lot of that IP is closed, because that's the stuff that we rely on to make it, be able to pay the bills. And I'd say on that front, the really cool thing though is that we've made the data available. So a lot of people are contributing imagery. They want to be able to utilize that imagery. That's something that they can do. And then they can actually utilize the underlying data. So even though that IP itself is not open, we really try hard to make all the imagery and data available for OpenStreetMap, which I think at the end of the day is what most people care about, the data itself. And then we have made a lot of data available to researchers who are looking to, improve algorithms themselves. And there are a lot of different collaborations that our research teams have done there. In fact, maybe that could be a separate podcast in itself, talking to the research team and some of the collaborations they've done and some of the like longer term research they're doing on various aspects of CV.
Oh, I'd absolutely love to hear about that. I've seen a lot of partnerships with you guys from big companies like haven't you partnered with like BMW and Toyota?
Yeah, so I probably won't speak too much to them today, but yeah, we definitely, like in the automotive sector, definitely partner with some of the key players there, and that's really about the self-driving car angle and how heavily they rely on maps. So you've probably seen on our blog, that's something that we talk about often. Maps of the maps of the future that these cars rely on need to be up to date, and the traditional model of driving a street once a year or once every couple of years with a very expensive device capturing all this LiDAR data and high quality imagery, that doesn't scale well. And that's where Mapillary comes in, by being able to make better maps very quickly, even if it's relying on a community contributor in Berlin or someone using an Android phone or a GoPro in Manila. all of that feeds into creating a more up-to-date picture of the map, and that's what automotive companies really value at the moment is finding ways to scale those maps so they can start putting them in self-driving cars.
I think that's great. I want as much OpenStreetMap as the heart of my self-driving car as possible. I want us to be the future.
Well, wasn't there rumors that Tesla was utilizing a lot of the car park data in OpenStreetMap? So that's probably one of the first big examples of that.
Yeah. In our area, I've seen a lot of parking areas popping up where Tesla owners have figured out if they add that, that'll eventually make its way, I think, into Mapbox data, if I understood it correctly. And then Tesla could utilize it for their smart park feature.
So,
I've not been able to talk to anybody about it, but I've seen the mappers.
So what level of detail needs to be added in for the car park for it to be rendered properly in Mapbox?
From what I understand, it was the parking area itself.
Okay.
And I'm not even sure if that shows up on Mapbox Streets. I don't think it actually does show up on Mapbox Streets, but they still have the data. Just because it doesn't get rendered on the map doesn't mean they don't look at the data.
Right.
So yeah, it's not necessarily the parking aisles, but I think the parking area.
Okay, good to know. That's a very positive incentive to have Tesla contributors joining the OSM fold.
Yeah, hopefully there'll be better mappers than the Pokemon Go mappers.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's
not that I'm sure we got some good mappers out of Pokemon Go too, but boy, have we had to fix a lot.
Yeah, that example still makes me laugh. Have you seen any instances of that recently?
I think the last time I saw something was about a year ago, something big anyways, where somebody had deleted a school in the county of Greenville because you can't play Pokemon Go at school, like they geofence it. So they deleted the school.
Huh.
Yeah. I hope I didn't give anybody
almost
any
deserves like an A+ and maybe, I don't know, geography, and then maybe an F in whatever subject he was playing Pokemon Go in. But
yeah,
definitely frustrating.
It was creative.
That community.
Yeah, they're messing with my map though.
Yeah, I think my favorite was I was looking at a suburb in downtown Melbourne, and I was like, wow, I don't recall a large lake in the middle of Fitzroy, which is like a hipster neighborhood in Melbourne. I'm like, hang on. This isn't right. So I deleted it. And I assume to this day it was a Pokemon Go contributor.
So speaking of different kinds of contributors, I know you'd mentioned earlier that the vast majority of Mapillary contributors are from OpenStreetMaps, but I know you also have partnerships with organizations like Here Maps, right?
Yeah, so we've said for a long time we want to be a neutral platform where people can contribute data and use it for all kinds of different purposes. And Here Maps has been a wonderful partner over, I think it was 2016 that all started. So what's that, 4 years now? And they have an interesting model in which they collect a lot of their own data to build up their maps. So they've got all kinds of programs with vehicles with LiDAR and, really fancy equipment that drive around the world. Then they have different partners that they purchase data from. And then they have a community contributor component as well, which they call Here Map Creator. And they get students in particular contributing, a lot of universities, even high schools, and teaching kids about GIS and doing so through the Here Map Creator platform, which is a bit like a similar to ID Editor, but in a more simplified way so that they really focus people on roads, points of interest, and yeah, I think those two key areas, and then some metadata around them. But the great thing about that partnership is that Here has contributed over probably about 30 million plus images now. I'll have to come back to the exact figure, but it's like well into the millions of images, and they've been willing to make that publicly available. And that's from a lot of that's from their community around the world. So places like Taiwan, which we actually didn't have a big presence in otherwise, and their university contributors there uploading a lot of imagery. Italy as well, a lot of small Italian villages where they were interacting with high schools there and getting kids to contribute. So it's been a really wonderful partnership because they've been able to leverage imagery from the OpenStreetMap community, and the OpenStreetMap community has been able to leverage imagery from here. Another one actually is Russia. They work a lot with automotive and a lot with different insurance companies, all kinds of people in the transportation space, and so there was a lot of dash cam data that we could leverage
Oh, yeah.
there and upload to Mapillary, which opened up this whole angle of dash cams and working out how useful they are for mapping purposes. Yeah, no, the dash cams are incredibly useful, and the Blackview has been one we've been working with a lot, and that's been a huge source of image growth as well for us because, as you know, like you can speak to it, just having that dash cam there so that when you turn on the car and go out for a drive, you don't really have to think about putting a GoPro on the front of your car with a wire dangling out on the bonnet. You can just drive and very easily capture imagery.
Yeah, I like using the dash cam because it also has the added benefit of being a dash cam. So if I ever do get in a wreck, I've got that for insurance purposes as well.
That's probably the primary purpose of most dash cams, but if you can use them for mapping as well, even better.
But if you're a hardcore mapper, that's just the bonus.
Yeah, the other way around. I think I've definitely been glad to have it in a few driving incidents.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So you mentioned universities in Taiwan and automotive in Russia, but do you have any organizations or larger government organizations, I should say, using Mapillary?
Yeah, so there's plenty of government organizations using Mapillary, a lot of departments of transportation.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been wonderful in realizing that they have these data sets that they've collected often for road assessment purposes. So monitoring the quality of the road or monitoring curbside assets like the signs and whether they're navigational or speed limit signs or other. And they've got millions of images usually of their entire network, and they've decided to open those up, upload them to Mapillary and think of it as another type of open data. They often have things like the location of public toilets throughout the county or the location of schools throughout the county, which people can import. But this is another aspect of open data that often just sits on a server somewhere gathering dust. So it's really good that these are being opened up. Some examples are the Department of Transportation in Vermont. In Australia, we had Vic Roads, and then city councils like the city of Geelong and Launceston in Tasmania, Logan as well, which has been a wonderful partner, uploading a lot of their existing imagery, both footpath imagery that they've collected or sidewalk data, as you call it in the US, and then road data as well, which they've been using for monitoring roadside assets. So I love the government partnerships because I think it forces them to think more about the end user of this data, which is their constituents. And it's great for the constituents because they have like an additional data source if they're interested in OpenStreetMap and adding more data and looking for more street level imagery they can use.
Yeah, I know. I've talked to several GIS managers who said we'd love to open up more of our data, but we don't know how. We're tasked by our governments to be GIS professionals. We're not front end developers. We don't necessarily have the budget to hire 3 software developers to write a website to make all of our assets available to the public in a nice, beautiful way. So I think platforms like this, where they can easily share their data, are important. And not just nice, important to what people are paying for via their taxes.
Yeah, definitely. And it also helps with like practical implications. One of the examples that a government employee gave me was talking about, let's say a tree is causing an issue in a particular neighborhood and you want to see exactly which tree this member of the public is calling up about. You'd have the imagery there. You can see, okay, it's affecting this property lot, and actually have a more productive discussion with them. And it saves you sending around a government employee to have to go there and have a look at it. They can just start the conversation straight away with Mapillary imagery.
Right. They can have that conversation in an up-to-date fashion.
Yeah.
They can have that imagery processed in, a couple hours, right?
Yeah, in a couple of hours and collect it regularly. We've had situations of putting cameras on leaf blowing trucks and snow plowers and garbage trucks, all vehicles that, wow. These are vehicles that usually get every single street in a municipality, and they do it often. And so when you think about the amount of data they can collect, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah, that's great. And I look forward to being able to look at the history on a daily or weekly or monthly or yearly basis, being able to go down my street and what it looked like 5 years ago, what it looked like the day it was built. all the way till now. That'd be awesome to see how things age over time.
Yeah, it really puts it into perspective. I love the time travel feature. It's one of my favorite features on Mapillary. Just
Yes.
that little clock icon that you see down the bottom right if there's multiple images of that road. And yeah, sometimes you don't even realize, like, because you maybe drive that street every day, you don't even realize how much it changes. But then you go back and you look at imagery from 4 years ago or something, and you realize, wow, that entire building didn't exist like 4 years ago. And you can see the construction phases, the seasons change.
There's a construction project here that took, I think, 2 or 3 years, where they completely redid the intersection of two interstates and a big road. And I think there's 6 or 7 new bridges. It's a huge intersection. And I've got Mapillary Imagery covering pretty much all 3 years of that. And you can see my paths change as they reroute traffic, as the new bridges get built and then used and then shut down and then reopened. And our GIS managers were just blown away. They're like, whoa, we had no idea that anybody had this data. This is amazing.
Yeah, well, hopefully they're able to start using it as a source, either just the image viewer or maybe some of the map features themselves. And then it'd be interesting to see if they start getting to a stage where they trust OpenStreetMap as a source. I know a lot of councils in Europe are getting bigger on that, but a lot of the others still have that old school mentality of not being purely comfortable utilizing a resource that is in some ways crowdsourced.
Yeah, no, I've heard that before. Basically, the idea is, if it's so great, why would they give it away for free? It must have no value. Free and open source software has the same problem. But of course, like when I went to the fire department and I showed them we had all their driveways in their rural area and for their entire fire district, nobody else has that data. Nobody. We're the only ones with it. So that instantly inspired a lot of confidence. So I know we can overcome that. Yeah, here in the US, the biggest problem I find is people don't know about OpenStreetMap. They're like, oh yeah, I think I heard the name one time at a conference, but I really don't know anything about it, which is terrible. But then at least we get to make a good first impression.
Yeah, all my friends, I have this conversation with them regularly. I mention OpenStreetMap, and I'm always, I don't know if I'd say I'm surprised or I'm not surprised, but the majority of them don't know what OpenStreetMap is. And then I say, well, do you know Apple Maps? Do you know Facebook Maps? Do you know Mapbox? Most of them don't even know Mapbox, but at least they know Apple Maps, they know Facebook Maps, and some of these other maps that utilize OpenStreetMap. And I try to get the point across, well, this data is actually utilized every day in applications that you use, and you're probably not even aware of it. So it's an incredibly important tool. Yeah, maybe it will change. Maybe the awareness of it will increase over time as location becomes ever more important in the applications people use.
Yeah. Well, I think companies like yours are doing a phenomenal job about raising awareness. I know when I show somebody Mapillary Imagery and then I turn on the computer vision toggle, and it all of a sudden parses the image into like sky and road and land and lines and sign, everybody's eyes lights up. And they're like, whoa, that's so cool, which I love seeing that reaction. And I think that goes a long way to saying, yes, open source, it's here. It's a great solution.
It definitely gets a lot of people excited, the computer vision side of things. So they very quickly extrapolate from that, and they're like, okay, can you identify this? And can you identify that?
Yes.
You got to slow down. That could be a difficult problem to solve. Like sometimes it's like, can you identify what type of tree is it or what type of flower? And it's like, not yet. Hopefully one day, but not yet.
Yeah. Well, 2 more quick questions. Speaking on that, can you tell people about the tagging game that you guys have? Because I don't think a lot of people know about that.
The verifications?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Austin's referring to the verification games, which is something that anyone can create. And this is where you can take features that Mapillary has detected. So it could be 60 kilometer per hour speed signs, or it could be crosswalks that we were talking about earlier. And you can say, give me all the crosswalks in downtown Greenville, and help us validate whether they're correctly identified or whether they're false positives. And so you go through, it's very much like a captcha, one of the more recent Google captchas that you might have seen, where they ask you to identify all the traffic signs in an image. In this case, you're presented with one, and hopefully it's correct, in which case you give it a thumbs up. If it's incorrect, you give it a thumbs down. If it's a bit unsure because the image is really blurry or dark, you can skip it. But it's a really useful tool because it enables the community to remove false positives from the data set.
Yeah.
And in the longer term, allows us to retrain our algorithms. So some of these features, particularly things like fire hydrants, it's quite interesting. They can change a lot around the world. And by having verification games like this, we can get what we say is a human in the loop. So get the human to help us verify whether a fire hydrant looks different in the Faroe Islands to how it does in South Carolina or in the Philippines. So we've had huge interest in the verification project because people were like really good about understanding the benefits of this and, you know, understanding the longer term implications of doing this. And we've had millions and millions of verifications of different features since it was launched.
Great. Cool. So one more final question, Ed.
Sure.
What's coming up next? What's new? What's down the pipe for Mapillary?
Sure. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, one of the key things is making sure the data that we serve to OpenStreetMap is useful for people and presented in a way that is easy for people to interact with. And so I think really putting more time into our ID and JOSM integrations is something that we'd love to do more of. Verifications as well. So a lot of verifications have taken place now, and I think there's a lot of existing data, particularly around things like the map features where often there can be duplicates of the same feature. And we're very putting in a concerted effort to reduce the amount of duplication there and make sure that what you're seeing on the map is a one-of, that we're a bit more accurate in what we detect. Because if you look at the list of map features, some are fantastic and identified really well. Others are more of a challenge. So we're trying to build more consistency there and just improve overall accuracy. So I think those two things are very much a focus of us going forward, and working with a lot of our partners in different sectors. We didn't talk about humanitarian much, but they're utilizing a lot of our data as well. And so just making sure that our tools can address these different use cases.
Yeah, I know I said one last question, but you touched on humanitarian mapping. Mapillary is such a great tool for that, just because anybody can do it with a cell phone. And so many more people have cell phones than expensive mapping rigs with huge cameras, that you can just quickly take that imagery, and as long as you have an internet connection at some point, upload it. And that's such a wonderful, useful thing to people who wouldn't otherwise have that tool.
Yeah, field data collection is more important in the humanitarian use case than anywhere else. And it's been really cool to see Mapillary as an increasing part of that. I think the internet barrier is still one of the significant challenges there, that people are creative. They always find the fastest internet connection in their town and leverage that to upload Mapillary data. So that's really cool to see. It can take overnight sometimes just to upload 100 images, but we've seen a lot of students in particular putting efforts in places like Kampala, Uganda, where Makerere University has been super active, and places like Winneba in Ghana, where people are contributing a lot of imagery around street lighting now. So it's wonderful to see people overcoming the challenges of internet access and still managing to upload a lot of data.
Well, thanks so much for being here, Ed. I really appreciate your morning and my evening.
It's great to chat.
Over the time difference.
It's great to chat. I love the podcast, and I'm really keen to see future episodes. I think OpenStreetMap is probably really looking forward to something like this. And now you've got one episode now, right, with Maggie Cooley, and a few more on the way. So I'm sure it's going to increase in popularity very quickly once people know about it.
Yeah, thanks. All right, Ed. Well, thanks again, and happy mapping.
Happy mapping.